Worldwide, an estimated 47 million people are living with dementia. Alzheimer's disease is the most common cause of dementia, contributing to about 70% of all cases.
Alzheimer's disease is a fatal and progressive disease of the brain. It affects people's memory, thinking, and behavior. Alzheimer's is not normal aging.
When a patient comes in to see me because they or their family are concerned that they're showing memory loss, our approach is really to do a very detailed history and physical exam. We do a neurological assessment, memory testing, and other cognitive testing. We often order lab tests and brain imaging like CAT scans or MRI scans, but these are really meant to rule out other possible causes of memory loss other than Alzheimer's disease.
Well, it all began a long time ago, about 12 years ago, when Peter had a serious fall down a flight of basement stairs, bouncing his head on the concrete floor. He had a CAT scan, they didn't do an MRI, and said there was no concussion, but he had other problems. He had a dislocated shoulder and torn rotator cuff, etc. Sometimes he did better than others, but then you could see a change. The ability to make decisions, to plan ahead, to think ahead, was becoming more and more difficult for him. At one point in time, our psychiatrist wanted us to see an Alzheimer's specialist, and we could not get an appointment because the doctors were doing clinical studies. They were only seeing people who have already been diagnosed with Alzheimer's.
Our diagnosis is very much based on the history and exam. So getting a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease or another brain disease is really important for many reasons. When patients and families come in to see the doctor, they want answers. They want to understand what's going on. And even if the news is not good news, they want a definitive explanation for what they've been observing at home.
Positron emission tomography, or PET imaging, allows us to see amyloid brain plaques in a living person. Previously, this characteristic of Alzheimer's could only be identified during an autopsy.
Amyloid PET scans are really different than any of the other available tools that we have because they provide direct evidence for a biological process, in this case amyloid plaques, that defines Alzheimer's disease. The scans light up when people have amyloid plaques. When people don't have a significant amount of amyloid in their brain, the scans are negative.
At this time, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid has decided not to cover amyloid imaging broadly, but has issued coverage with evidence development, meaning they're willing to cover amyloid imaging if we're gathering evidence for its usefulness. So the Alzheimer's Association has decided to launch the IDEA study, where we are able to provide coverage, along with a partnership with CMS, for over 18,500 individuals who fit the appropriate use criteria that were developed by the Alzheimer's Association. And our hope is that at the end of the IDEA study, we'll be able to demonstrate sufficient data for CMS to consider coverage for amyloid imaging, especially for those people that are living with an uncertain diagnosis.
Preliminary results from the study were released in July 2017 at the Alzheimer's Association International Conference.
What we hoped to find was at least a 30% change in the patient care plan after the PET scan. What we found was considerably more significant. We found that the patient care plan changed in over 2/3 of all patients.
We saw a significant change in health management, meaning that perhaps they hadn't been on Alzheimer's medications prior and now were put on medications, or perhaps they were on medications for Alzheimer's that were unnecessary because they didn't have Alzheimer's disease. That's a really exciting result because this is actually an immediate change in health management as a result of the IDEA study.
The IDEA program and the opportunity to have Peter have a PET scan to determine whether or not he actually did have Alzheimer's came into the fore. And Peter did have that PET scan, and they found amyloid plaques, and that was the diagnosis, which was heartbreaking, and yet we were so grateful because now we really knew what we had to deal with.
Wow, it was a real, in a way, shocker, but we were leading up to this, so there was a kind of a hint or an awareness of it. And then finally, yes, you do have it. And there's so much that I feel, from my perspective, needs to be done. And I'm very hopeful for all of those who are in my position.
It's been a long journey to get from where we started to where we are. We now have some hope, but I just hope that we can have as much of a normal life as possible, and it's because that we were able to get a diagnosis thanks to the IDA study and being able to have a PET scan. Otherwise, we'd probably be somewhere at yet 2 or 3 other doctors trying to figure out what was happening and what was wrong.
At the Alzheimer's Association, we are committed to bringing the IDEA study to life so that diagnostic that we have invested in for a decade can actually be brought into a patient's life and benefit their health outcomes. We're hopeful that at the end of the IDEA study, we'll have enough evidence to demonstrate to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid that it's important to provide coverage for this amyloid PET scan for those families that are facing an uncertain diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease.
For more information, visit alz.org.